Good evening all, and welcome. We're going to be heading camping tonight, and we also have the pleasure of being joined by Papa Scare in tonight's video. If you enjoy his narration, be sure to check him out when we're done. I would also like to mention that tonight's video has some pretty gory scenes. You have been forewarned. But for now, it's time to get comfortable. Like, subscribe, and press the bell icon, and let the darkness take control. I'm a pretty avid backpacker in the Pacific Northwest. Sometimes I'll hike for days on end without seeing another person. I think it's exhilarating, being completely alone. There's really no feeling like it. You get used to it, but personally I can never help but be on edge. The environment is completely serene and friendly, but there's a constant feeling in the back of your mind. It's hard to put your finger on it. Most of the time you'll be chugging along, comfortable in your mind, but when you stop for rest or to fill up with water, you can't help but look over your shoulder. Nothing bothers me out much in the woods. I've run into brown bears, had elk trample through camps late at night and much more. But one night was different. I was on a deep backwoods hike in the late fall of the season. It was pretty cold, but the snow hadn't quite started falling yet. I like that. In fact, I usually plan my trips this way. The forest ranger I spoke to when I was organizing the trip said I was the only hiker she knew of who'd be up there at that time. I was using dispersed camping sites so far off the beaten path they didn't have fire pits. That night was 5 or 6 miles from the trail into the area. I set up camp at a site about 100 yards from a stream, close enough that a faint babbling was audible. I lit a fire, cooked dinner, read for a while, and was settling down to sleep. I lay listening for a while to the sounds of the woods and the creek. Just as I was nodding off, I think I hear voices. Nothing distinct, no clear words, but clearly a group of people were having a good time, laughing, maybe telling a story around a campfire. A feeling of dread came over me. I thought I shouldn't leave the tent. Fear like I've never felt engulfed me. All the hairs on my arms and legs and on the back of my neck stood on end. I lay there for a while in a panic, the voices carrying on laughing indistinctly. After a while they receded into the background noise. I still didn't leave the tent. I was too afraid. The next morning, after a very short night's sleep, I searched the surrounding area and the path to the site. A few shoe prints I found were faded and worn around the edges, too old and too few to be from this size of the group I heard. I tried to shrug it off as nerves. Maybe nervousness got the best of me, but I couldn't shake a certain tension. I made good time to the next site, the last of the trip, looking around a little more than usual, but still no one to be seen. That site had no stream. Dry camping isn't a blast, but it's doable if you pack enough water for cooking and drinking for the night. It was a lot quieter, just the chirps of bugs and the wind rustling the trees. I cooked my dinner and stayed up a good while after dark, sitting on a log, looking at the stars, and listening to the sounds of the forest, trying to hear the voices from the night before, but there was nothing. I turned in for the night, stretching every act out. I lay there, restless for what felt like hours. Finally, calm comes over me, and then it's back. Nothing threatening or particularly scary, just the sounds of a group of 10 to 15 people having a good time, barely audible above the background noise. This time I'm calm, and there's what seems to be an internal dialogue in the back of my mind. Why not join them? Sounds like they're having fun. I'd really rather stay here. This is entirely unconscious and goes on for a while. I'd never experienced anything like this. I was worried that I'd lost it. And after a while the noises faded away into the white noise, and I felt that I was alone. The next day I packed as quickly as I could to get out of there quickly. During the day I was more at ease, like I had always been in the past. I was relieved when I got back to the car and started back home. I told the story a few times, and every time I felt a little bit of dread from the first night. I really had no reason to feel strongly about what happened. I just heard strange noises in the forest, nothing extraordinary, but I felt it. On one occasion, I told the story to my teacher, who's a native. He got quiet for a minute, then said I had run into stick Indians. He said that it was good I didn't leave the tent. Stick Indians are evil and dangerous beings that prey on children and women. The look on his face was sober. He told me not to go back to that place again. These spirits are extremely aggressive and attack and kill at the slightest provocation, including even saying their Salish names, which he refused to do. Whenever the subject comes up, I get that same fear in me. As I write this, I'm thousands of miles from those sites, and my arms are still quaking.
A couple of days ago, my boyfriend and I went camping in eastern Germany. We had found an incredible spot to set up our tent, right by a river in the woods. We parked the car about 20 meters away from us, behind a bush. After we set everything up, we sat by the river and enjoyed the sunset. It was getting darker, and we could hear the animals around us, getting more active. We were well aware that we would hear some creepy noises at night. Anyway, my boyfriend decided to bring our food to the car to not attract any more animals that night. I stayed at our spot, enjoying the view. As soon as he walked to the car, this strange feeling got to me. A feeling of fear and alert. I kept checking on my boyfriend, who jokingly said something like, "Please keep looking after me," which is also untypical for him. Maybe it's worth to mention that neither him nor I are easily scared. We're both tough and had a knife with us too. When we got back to our spot, he kneeled down next to me and said, "I heard something really heavy walking in those woods." I thought he was joking, trying to scare me, but he was serious, and I could see how uneasy he was. He said we should have a look with our knife and flashlights, so we did. About halfway to the car, I could hear it too. Some really heavy footsteps. First I thought, oh well, a deer. But not soon after, I noticed that it clearly sounded like bipedal footsteps. In that moment, I got chills and felt an insane moment of panic. We stood there frozen, staring into the woods. When we moved, it moved. When we stood still, it stood still. It clearly mocked our steps. That went on for 2 minutes. We've had enough. I rushed back to the tent as my boyfriend stood guard with a knife on hold. I grabbed everything valuable and necessary, and we rushed to the car. As I grabbed the stuff, I could hear it moving in the bushes. As soon as we were in the car, we locked the door and drove off to gain some distance. We parked the car in a parking lot and talked about what just happened. My boyfriend said that when he brought the food to the car, he already had a weird gut feeling of something or someone lurking. The reason for him asking me to keep checking on him. As soon as he heard the steps, he said he literally got chills down his whole spine. He also saw some sort of vague outline of something, but couldn't identify anything. He'd never felt more altered and panicked in his whole life. Neither did I. It was pure survival and gut instincts to get away from whatever it was in the bush. We slept in the car that night. Now he thinks it was a creepy human who was up to no good. I think that is a possibility, but that it might be something different. Do you guys have any ideas of what it might have been, apart from a human? We do not have any large predators in Germany. Only wolves, which are rare and not bipedal.
Several of the countries I did work in were and still are the side of decade-long civil wars, insurrections and genocides that ravaged them socially, politically and economically, and structurally. Given we worked in the remote wild lands of these countries protecting the species people pay millions for like elephants and rhinos, you'd figure that one of our biggest fears would be poaching units. Many of these units were linked to Al-Shabaab, the LRA, Al-Qaeda, and other such terror groups. Look up the Kenyan Westgate Mall massacre, and you'll see the result of money from high-end poaching. However, we were usually well-equipped and trained to handle pretty much any situation that might befall us, and we had plenty of violent and non-violent encounters under our belts. That said, the thing that made me the most nervous in many war-torn regions like Angola, Mozambique, was the potential for unexploded landmines left over from the sometimes up to 30-year civil war. I was especially nervous because we worked in very remote locations where groups like the Halo Trust, who remove mines, didn't really go as their priority as more populated centers. In some cases, we had to hire minesweeper-type vehicles to drive ahead of a column, going down unmapped roads to prevent from being blown up. I think what made me the most nervous about them is how impossible they were to spot. I had been trained to scan my surroundings for glints of equipment, i.e. scopes, guns, watches, etc. It's amazing what can give your position away to the trained eye. Tips of horns in tall grass, like Cape buffalo, that will mess you up something quick. Listen for changes in the sounds of the environment, like a sudden silence, or particular animals' alarm calls may indicate predators like people or leopards. Smells cue you in: death, campfire, cordite, and you can usually spot a puff adder before stepping on one. Mines, however, were often completely invisible, especially after 5 to 30 years in the dirt. One time, one of our guides/trainers, a former Selous scout, found one in the bush and pointed it out, and showed the 2 little metal prongs that popped ever so slightly out the dirt. You would likely never see it, until it was too late. I'd been working for about a year at this point, so wasn't green, and we were in Angola working with an organization to do some mapping, species surveying, and anti-poaching type work. We were walking along a dirt road, overgrown with scraggy shrubs and such. The nearest village was about a 4 to 5 mile walk away, and there were several amputees who had stepped on mines at some point. The country has been estimated to have up to 20 million landmines, although no one really knows. We got reckless and comfortable. Scary how easy that is to do. I was 3 back in the column, about 30 yards from our point man. He had a pair of binoculars and a rangefinder and was spotting animals for a survey we were conducting. Suddenly, he disappeared in a cloud of smoke and dust that billowed up from the ground and engulfed him with a sharp, metallic bang. The blast wasn't super powerful. Landmines are usually designed to maim, and little pebbles pelted my face. The cloud of chalky dust soon enveloped the column, and everyone hacked and coughed. Our armed unit quickly found concealment and set up behind the blast, and myself and another followed the point man's tracks to avoid setting off anything else. He laid in a crumpled heap, surrounded by charred dirt. I grabbed his web gear, look up Vietnam web gear and you'll get an idea, and drag him back out of the thick dust. The smell of explosive accelerants burnt up my nose. As I dragged him, I noticed a trail of blood coming from his legs. It looked like the scene from a horror movie where the monster has had a good bite at his victim, and there was a long trail of blood. I stopped and jumped over to his front leg. His right leg below the knee was gone. A pulverized mass of bone and singed cloth remained, blood everywhere. I immediately snatched 2 tourniquets from my belt, got them up and over the wound, cranking the first down as tightly as possible before adding the second. The point man, Sandil, screamed for the first time. He was a tough dude, But as they say, the tourniquets often hurt worse than the injury. His left leg was badly shredded too, but we stopped the bleeding with pressure bandages and wound packing. We wrapped him up tight in mylar blanket to prevent shock. We stretched him back down the road and managed to reach a rescue company via satellite phone. Within the hour, he was whisked away. He ended up getting surgery in Joburg or Cape Town, I forget which, after a long flight and a few hospital stops on the way. He lost his right leg, but his left recovered, and last I heard he was working as guide in a small private reserve in KwaZulu-Natal. Anyway, that's the reason why my girlfriend gets annoyed when I don't talk about it while we're hiking, because I'm too busy scanning for mines, poachers, predators, and other stuff that isn't there.
My boyfriend and I were camping in Peter Lougheed Provincial Park this past summer. On the last night of our stay, as I'm falling asleep, my boyfriend tells me I've been pushing him off his side of the air mattress and asks me to give him room. I was trying to steal heat from him as he's a human furnace. Sounds good. We go to sleep. I wake up to him shoving me, and I think I'm crowding him by accident, so I move over a little. He shoves me harder, and I'm annoyed now because I already moved, and I'm tired, so somewhat loudly I say, "I'm moving," and he grabs me and shushes me. I know something is wrong and am awake straight away. He whispers very softly, "Do you hear something?" And right away, I hear the unmistakable exhaling huff of a bear right by my head. My heart is pounding because at this point, I can hear it sniffing us and huffing, which is not good if you know grizzlies. My boyfriend says, "We need to get to our truck," and I agree. But from what I can hear, the bear is between our tent and truck. Luckily, we have command start, and our truck has a very aggressive start. So when my boyfriend started the truck, I heard some crashing through the trees, and we both ran to the truck. We drove a lap around our campground to make sure the bear hadn't gone into anyone else's sight, but didn't see it. We slept in the truck until it was light out, and let the wildlife hotline in the area know before we left. We started second-guessing ourselves because this all happened at about 1:30 a.m. But when we were packing up the tent that next day, we found coarse brown hair all over the side of the tent where our heads were, and on the grill of the truck. I've never been so terrified and full of adrenaline in my life. When I was a teenager, I used to go out camping by myself. I had a spot where I liked that was across a few fences from my grandparents' house in the middle of nowhere. One of the places I cut through was a pasture full of cattle. Around cattle, especially cattle unfamiliar with me, I try to be very careful to not spook them, but otherwise cows are pretty easygoing. This was about a mile from my grandparents' house and probably about 2 from my destination. The one time I am thinking of, the last time, I slipped through the fence to find the cattle already freaked out. They were insanely agitated about something I was not aware of, so I stayed well clear of them as I went through the pasture. I had a good time camping that night and packed up the next morning. As I went back into that pasture, however, there was this ridiculously bad smell. It smelled like a skunk had fought with something in a fertilizer barrel, and the barrel broke open. It was awful. I tried to look around for the cows to make sure they were not going to surprise me, and I could not find them. They were just gone. There was some brush and trees though, so I thought they were just out of sight. I keep walking through the place to get home, and the smell is so bad that I set down my stuff at the fence line and decide to investigate. Well, I found the cows. All of them were shot and ripped apart. Someone had carefully shot them in the head with a bolt gun style thing, or hit them hard enough with a pointy object to bust through their skulls, and eviscerated all of them. They had also drugged them all into a little shallow ravine and piled the bodies up. It was horrible. I hightailed it out of there, back to my gear. My stuff was gone, as in, I set it right there on this rock, and it is not within eyeshot. A quick glance showed me that there was not anything ripped or fallen out, so something, or someone, had picked it up while I was 200 yards away for less than 5 minutes. I think Usain Bolt would not have been able to catch me on the way home. I never heard anything else about those cows, and I did not go back to the old camping spot again. Second story. My cousin is with the Forest Service in the Montana, Wyoming area, and I decided to go up there with her to literally test the waters. She does hydrology and has to ride out to the middle of nowhere to test streams and snow runoff to ensure no contaminants. So I thought that sounded fun and wanted to do a bit of a tour with her. We were going to have to camp out there for 2 nights, so we packed up all our gear in saddlebags or saddle bundles and started out. The first day and night was amazing. Beautiful scenery and amazing air quality. It really is so peaceful out there. I love that area and wish I got to go up there more often. Anyway, we started out on the second day, and my cousin said, "You want to see something weird?" Of course I said yes. So she led me on a bit of a side journey into this tiny little ravine. We ended up traveling about 2 hours away from our actual path we had laid out. At the very end of this fold in the land, she dismounts and tells me to get off my horse too. We tie them up in this gorgeous little clearing, and she tells me to follow this tiny wildlife path and bring our little rechargeable radio. It is one of those you can plug in or wind up, and it also acts as a lantern if you really need it to, but that kills the batteries quickly. I do, and out in the middle of nowhere, there is a huge coil of wire sticking out of the ground. The wire itself is not weirdly large, like some buried transmission wire, but small, like 10 or 12 gauge wiring for a house. It trailed off into the brush and trees, so naturally, I decided to follow the damn thing out of curiosity. My cousin trails behind me as I do, and this wire, after coming straight up from the ground, is strung across limbs of trees, then back to the ground. Then it snakes around rocks and finally dead ends into an outlet. That outlet is mounted on the side of a desk. It looks like a schoolteacher's desk from when I was growing up, with a metal base and a pseudo-wood plastic top thing. No chair, no building, no nothing. Just this outlet and this desk. I'm staring confused at this desk in the middle of a forest when my cousin takes the radio, pulls out the cord, and plugs it into the outlet. It then lit up and started blaring static. The wire was being fed from somewhere. Now, the place where we were had no road access, no buildings for many miles, and no other people around. And yet, there was a live outlet. Weird as hell. No spooky jump scares or bodies, just one lone powered desk in the middle of the woods. I wish I had taken a picture of it.
I have a friend who is a trail ranger. Basically a ranger who can't get you in trouble. He told me about this time he was gathering illegally placed wildlife cameras and knocking down hunting stands, feeders and blinds with another actual ranger. The other ranger wasn't feeling so well, so he said he was going to head back, as it's a 1-hour ATV ride. My friend finishes up with the last one when he hears voices. Keep in mind, he's far off the beaten path. He calls out, and no one replied. As it was getting dark, he started to head back, and found that his ATV wouldn't start. He then noticed that the battery was not connected anymore. He connected it and started to drive, but it wasn't going very fast. Less than a half-mile later, the whole thing died. He radioed back basically saying, "Hey guys, I need someone to come pick me up." He told him they would be able to do it in an hour. He asked if the other guy got back and they said no. He settled down and started a small fire, but before long he heard voices again. It's dark. He is not happy. The voices sounded like an argument now. Someone was angry and yelling at someone else who sounded more scared. He called out and asked if anyone needed help. The voices didn't seem to care. He guessed they had to be at least 1,000 feet away. He radioed again, and they said that they were having trouble finding what path he might be on and haven't left yet. He asked them to just get the other ranger to tell them about where they are, because he left with the iPad that had the map. They said that he still wasn't back. About 3 more minutes go by and he hears the voices start up again. He decides to walk to them, hoping that maybe they can stop being drunk and maybe have a map. He walked in their direction, but the voices seemed to be getting further as he got closer. Finally, after 20 minutes, he gave up and walked back. He got a radio call and they said the other guy was found passed out covered in vomit and was being taken to hospital, but he crossed off everywhere they found a stand, so they have a general idea of where he is. Then the radio died, and then the voices came back. Bored out of his mind, he decided to listen to what they were arguing about and picked up things like, "Well, it wasn't yours to take. I don't care. You know better," and so on. His guess was 2 hunters arguing over a kill. He then heard the one shout something intelligible, then silence, then bang, a gunshot. He doused his fire and hid. After that he heard nothing, just his breathing for the next half an hour until he saw ATV lights. He told the guy picking him up everything, and they called back. They had people looking for 3 hours and found nothing. They came back the next day with police and dogs. After about an hour, a shallow grave was found in it, and a long, dead man who had clearly been shot in the face was there. It was a skeleton that was there for years. So either the argument he heard just ended with a bang and both parties went home last night, or he heard the murder of someone from years ago.
Throughout the US and seen some strange things. My brother and I came across an abandoned trailer town of sorts that scared the hell out of us. We also came across a rundown town, really, really small, out in New Mexico, that seemed to have one person living in it. We based that on the fact that there was still some food and supplies there that were fairly fresh, perhaps just a few days old. Spent a couple of days there trying to find the person, just to find out why they were staying in the town. Never found a person. We found the skeletal remains of an unknown number of deer, ranging from bucks to fawn, ensnared in a barbed wire fence that encompassed a 10 by 10 area of the Ozarks. A few of the skulls topped the fence posts, and there was one post in the middle of this area that had decaying deer bodies wrapped around it. It looked to be 2, but there were only 6 hooves jutting out of the wreckage. We found a dummy hanging from a tree while in the Yukon Territory of Canada, literally out in the middle of the woods. No reason for it, as far as we know. And we also came across a dead junkie on a road out of Olympia. Obvious OD, as he had his arm tied and a needle in hand. Eyes were glazed over and staring straight ahead, mouth slightly ajar.
My friends and I went canoe camping in a new provincial park. We had this neat trip planned. We'd get flown into the middle of the park with our canoes and canoe our way out over the course of the week. First night, everything is pretty normal and cool. Next day, we go over to the head of the trail up a mountain. Mountain is a bit of a misnomer. It's Ontario, so our mountains are pretty small. The base of the trail is in a campsite. We get out of our canoes and go up to the campsite to find the trail. The campsite is a wreck, like clothes tossed all around in the mud, a dehydrated meal that someone clearly hacked into with a knife barely eaten, snack wrappers and trash, a couple of pairs of shoes, 3 different tarps torn down and muddy, a sleeping bag, I think, things you wouldn't expect to be left behind even with the messiest of campers. No sign of anyone around, but plenty of evidence that there had been at least 3 to 5 people here. No signs of canoeing. Keep in mind, this is a lake you can only access via several days of hiking and or canoeing via plane. To this day, we don't know what happened there. It was a week before we got out of the park ourselves, and we were in a rough state when we did. It was a very rainy trip, so we never really found out what had happened. Some members of our party said they saw a canoe at the site the previous night, because they wanted to be at the site, but it had been occupied. But we woke up hella early and didn't see anything leave. Our best guess is still that someone had an emergency, maybe hypothermia. It was really rainy and they called out an emergency rescue, and in their haste, left the majority of their stuff behind.
I was out camping with my dog one night, along the Mogollon Rim of Arizona. It was dark and we were sitting around the campfire when we hear something behind a bush close to our camp. Instead of my dog barking at it, he begins to whimper. I don't think nothing of it and just tended to the fire. After a couple of minutes, we hear some more noises from a different bush. This time my dog gets up and goes over to the tent and scratches the door because he wants to go in. I toss a couple of rocks in the direction I heard the noise, and nothing happened. I'm spooked now, so I toss a couple of pieces of wood on the fire and climb into my tent with my dog, hoping that the light from the fire would keep whatever was out there away. We eventually fall asleep and, luckily, had no other disturbances during the night. The next morning, I go out behind the bushes where we heard the noises and found mountain lion tracks that were circling around our tent. I'm sure glad we didn't go looking at night when I heard the noises.
I was once canoeing the boundary waters between Minnesota and Canada. These aren't your normal backyard ponds. The boundary waters are thousands of enormous lakes, interconnected with each other. Think mini Great Lakes. We had been canoeing and camping along the lakes for about a week at this point. We didn't really have an itinerary, just planned to boat and camp and fish and live off the land for 2 weeks. We had a GPS and a sat phone to call a helicopter for pickup whenever we were done. Anyway, about a week in, we were set to canoe for a few hours to the next lake. An hour or so in, and we are at the center of an extremely long and narrow lake. Unfortunately, a storm started to blow in, and the waves on the lake swelled to 2+ feet, too much for our dinky canoes. We pulled off to a random clearing on the shore and set up camp in a rush to avoid being totally thrashed by a rainstorm. We just set camp and hunkered down for the night. By the next morning it had cleared up. We started walking up to the coast of the lake about 200 feet from our camp, looking for a good fishing spot. What we actually found was another campsite. However, it was absolutely wrecked. Trash strewn everywhere, tent collapsed and torn, clothes on the ground. At first, we were just disgusted, like who could be responsible for this, or left their food out to be eaten for bears. The more we looked around though, the weirder things seemed. For one, their garbage was still hoisted into a tree to keep it safe from bears, but the whole bag was ripped open despite being 30 feet in the air. Second, everything except the canoes was still at the campsite. Clothes, packs, food, rope, pans, like serious sets of hiking equipment, enough for 2 or 3 people. Half of it was trashed and torn open, mostly the packs, tents and clothes. The other half was totally untouched, but thrown on the ground, like someone noped the hell out of there in nothing but their long johns, ditching hundreds of dollars in gear in the process. We waited a few hours and eventually called it back to our helicopter crew, but they hadn't been aware of anybody else or gotten any distress calls. We eventually left everything and moved camp. Everyone was pretty upset by it, and a day or 2 later we just ended the whole trip early because it seemed like no one wanted to be out there anymore. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. First, we thought it was a bear attack, but there was food left uneaten, and I've seen bear attacks on camps before, but nothing like this. Bears rip open packs and go after food, and are generally pretty easy to scare away. What sticks with me is why all their clothes and packs were still there, after half being totally destroyed and the other half be untouched. I still don't get it. I've done a lot of other hiking and camping and rafting and biking all around the country, and I've never had as strange encounter as that one.
Guide camp in Victorian bushland. Girl Guides are a paramilitary exercise in the British tradition. My troop was competing in a camp competition. We were the furthest from the mother house, down the hill and put out of sight of every other campsite. One night, we were all dead asleep in our tent. 8 preteen girls. We heard snuffling and loud grunting around the tent. Then, the tent started to move and shake. This was an ex-army 8-person tent. Wooden beams and something was shaking the tent. One beam started to come loose and 2 girls made a run to the mother house. The rest of us tried to keep our tent up. Then we heard a louder thud and screaming, "Get up, get up, get up!" By now, we'd woken half the campsite. Turns out a family of wombats was upset. We were on prime grazing area and was pushing the annoyance away. One of the girls had tripped over a wombat. So, that's the time I thought I was going to die by a wombat.
I was hiking the Hoh rainforest on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington back in 2003. I was trying to do this really snazzy hike from the ocean to Mount Olympus. Well, day 1 is a blast, get everything accomplished. Day 2, fog, as thick as anything as you can imagine. I can't even get a decent GPS fix, so I'm pretty much blind. But I know if I follow the Hoh River upstream, I'll get to one of the campsites I'm going for. The day goes by and the fog isn't clearing up at all. I get to a fairly big clearing and set up my tent. I grab a power bar and chill out as it starts getting to the darkest black I've ever experienced. I'm seriously a bit unnerved at the whole thing, not scared as much as just anxious. But about 2 in the morning, I start hearing this huffing noise like Darth Vader without the helmet on. My imagination starts to go freaky and I reach for my flashlight. I pull the drawstring on my tent a little, very quietly, and poke my head out. Still dark as death, and I hear the noise coming from maybe 5 feet to my right. At this point, I'm seriously rethinking my belief in Sasquatch. I poke my flashlight out and turn it on. I'm on my feet away from a massive Roosevelt elk who'd lost his way in the dark too. He sees the flashlight and bolts the other way, tags a tree, and knocks himself clean out. I laid in the tent until I hear a groan, a bunch of commotion, and the big guy grunt away.
About 20 years ago, I had just finished my degree and was bummed because I couldn't find a job. A former roommate / good friend and I went on an overnight backpack trip near Burr Oak State Park in southeast Ohio. About 2 a.m., we were awoken in our tent by the sound of dozens of horses being ridden all around us. We could hear muted conversation, harness jingling, hoofs clopping, and we could feel it shaking the ground. We laid in our tent, and the sound just kept on, like a whole convoy was passing right beside us. After a few minutes, we unzipped the tent, and the sounds immediately ceased, and nothing was there. It was freaky. We were afraid they were going to ride over us, it was so intense. I have no idea who or what it was, but we're camped on a trail that had been used by John Morgan Hunt's Confederate raiders during the Civil War. Not a logical explanation, but it was deafening. There were so many horses. I can still hear men's voices murmuring as they rode by. Next morning, not a single hoofprint to be found.
A number of years ago, I was in the northern end of British Columbia, in the islands out by Port Hardy. I set up camp right by the ocean close to the shore, did the normal catch of fish, cook it for dinner on the campfire thing perfectly easily. A few hours pass and it's getting dark. I climb into the tent and fall asleep quickly, but I get awoken by extremely heavy breathing on the beach from something big in the area of my fire. But the tide was in now, so the waves would have covered it. My first thought is bear, but on the island where I was, bear was not common enough at all, to the point where there hadn't been one documented ever. This is blasting through my mind, but then the urban tales of Bigfoot run through my mind. At this point, I'm thinking there's no such thing as Bigfoot, so what the hell is it? I gained the courage to open my tent, shine my flashlight around but didn't see anything, so I get out of it. I'm shining my light around when I hear it again. This huge breath, but followed by a small splash. I focus my light on the beach where I see a massive orca rolling around on the kelp right about where my fire was. This behemoth of a marine animal scared the living hell out of me, but it turned into being one of the most amazing events I've ever witnessed. As I sat watching this massive animal rolling and playing yards from me, I noticed more of them just offshore, bobbing there, probably half asleep. Needless to say, I didn't sleep until after they left. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. As always, I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. If you did, be sure to let me know in the usual way. I'd also like to extend a huge thank you to Papa Scare for joining us in tonight's campsite venture. If you liked his content, you can check it out. We do pretty similar stuff. Link in the description and shown on screen shortly. A huge thanks to my amazing members and patrons for your contributions. You really are all amazing and it means a hell of a lot to me. So thank you. But for now, links on screen. Hopefully, see you again soon. Stay awesome and see you in the next one.